Hello and welcome back to Skylight Live. My name is Tyree Marshall and I'm an artistic associate at Skylight Theater, and I'm associate producer for Apartment Living by Bonnie B. Alvarez, our second show in our 2021-2022 season in joint collaboration with Playwrights Arena. As we've done for previous seasons at Skylight, Beyond Conversations is our series of panels which take a deep dive in topics relating to or connected to our shows at Skylight. Apartment Living follows 4 characters' journeys in navigating the pandemic while simultaneously living in the same apartment complex. 2 of the characters who we follow are interracial relationship, Alex and Cassandra, whose relationship gets tested while trying to survive the COVID-19 pandemic. With police brutality being a prominent topic during that time, discussions of differences of race and privilege are brought to the table. Tonight, we have 2 couples to discuss the racial dynamics within interracial relationships, investigate what conversations are had amongst them with the recent racial awakenings in America, and talk about how these relationships are portrayed in the media. I am pleased to introduce our moderator for this evening, Randé Dorn. Randé is a licensed therapist in California, working nationally and internationally as a coach and public speaker. She holds a master's degree from Pepperdine University in clinical psychology with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy, and another MFA from California Institute of the Arts, my alma mater, in dance and choreography. Please welcome Randé.
Hi, I'm Randé, and I'll be moderating this discussion. And first, I want to say I just hope that what we'll get out of this is just more insight and understanding around relationships in general, and hopefully get some insight in terms of the unique maybe benefits or struggles in being in a relationship that has a lot of diversity kind of built in. So I wanted to start by asking all 4 of you together individually, just kind of introduce yourself, but also introduce yourself as a couple. Are you married? How long have you been together? Do you have children, pets? So whatever kind of contextually you can share or that you would like to share with us. And whoever wants to go first, jump in.
Because I could start. I'm Blair, 32 years old, currently living in San Francisco, originally from LA. Living with my wife, Sarah, here. We've been together for 10 years, own 2 cats who we adore very much, probably too much, and trying to make it in this very expensive city. But so far, so good. And I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm 32 as well. Same background as Blair, except I was born in Korea, so I came here when I was 6 years old and have been here ever since.
Thank you. How about you 2?
Hey guys, my name is Michael. I'm 38, live in Los Angeles. We are a fairly new couple. We met on Hinge. I have 2 dogs. They might make appearances on this Zoom call, so excuse them, but they're kind of cute. And yeah.
My name is Shanna, and I'm 35, and I'm also from Los Angeles. And I have a really bad cat that Michael just loves.
That's one way of putting it.
When you say new couple, tell me a little bit more about that.
So yeah, we met on Hinge. We've been dating together for about a year and a half, just about, yeah. So we met during the pandemic. From my perspective, I'm not sure what Shanna would say, but from my perspective, like the pandemic hit, my dating was on pause for a good, number of months. I want to say like 5 or 6 months. I know Hinge and other dating apps are trying to get people to Zoom, but that's pretty awkward with like a stranger, you know, so even that was difficult or tough or awkward. So I felt like dating didn't quite open up till, at least for me, till like September, October. And that was, I think our first date was in October 2020.
Mm. Yeah. And so my first kind of opening question for all of you, first, thank you for saying yes to this, right? It can be vulnerable and awkward and courageous and brave. So I'm curious why you said yes. What is it that you wanted to maybe get out of this experience, or maybe even hoping to be revealed through this?
Well, I thought it was a really interesting topic, and I wanted to learn from other couples, their experiences as well.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing for me. And generally, I like having these discussions. It seems like most of them take place on social media, which may or may not be the healthiest forum for that kind of stuff. So I figured this would be a more educational, tame way to have those sorts of conversations.
Sure. I'm going to circle back. When you say I wanted to learn from other couples or hear from other couples, was there something that you feel isn't talked about enough? Or, yeah, let me start there.
When I say I want to learn from other couples, I guess I just want to see how their experience has been just being with someone of a different race, just because we are a newer couple. So it would be good to get their perspectives as well.
Sure.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting just because I think from the time I've grown up, like for me, it's always like the interracial part is always a thing because I'm multiracial, I'm triracial, if you want to say. So it's like, for me, it's always on, you know, I'm always aware of my race or races or my cultures. I feel like in every setting, you know, in the first time I meet people in a let's say a networking event, it's literally one of the first things that crosses my mind every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a multiracial or interracial couple, and then now even on more of a spotlight, I think.
Sure. And can you tell me a little bit more why it's the first thing on your mind when you walk into a new situation? Like, what is that for you?
Yeah, it's you know, I think for me, like I think it's in a way, and I might sound kind of like brash or blunt on certain things, but I feel like it's okay for me to express that. So like, for example, like I feel like it wasn't until the 2000s where, you know, mixed kids like became like the cool thing, the trendy thing, and it's only trended upward since, right? But for me, being a kid in the 80s and 90s, it was really tough for me. It wasn't cool because like everyone, I felt like I grew up in LA and in the high desert as a kid, and everyone had their groups. And for the most part, you know, it was like that racial group, whereas I never fit into any one of them. And so I had a lot of, you know, a lot of trouble, a lot of fights, a lot of, you know, negative things that I felt like I encountered because of my multiracialness and people not knowing, you know, like, and I think American culture, society, the first thing, going back to why it's the first thought for me is, you know, I feel like American society, American culture, and I do this too, you know, we immediately have to put people into boxes and categorize them for us to feel comfortable. And so, you know, so I think for me, what I've found growing up is a lot of times people are confused, you know, with what I am or my ethnic background. And then, yeah, and then there's the whole thing, you know, I think, especially during the pandemic, but it's been a thing. But from the pandemic forward, it's really been apparent, and the awareness has come about, which is great, that like from the time we were kids, billboards, magazines, everything portrayed like whiteness. And so that was a thing I carried my whole life. I thought I was inferior, or I read myself as inferior.
Yeah. Has that changed for you?
I mean, just growing up, being more aware, woke, understanding, also society as a whole, learning more about what brownness and blackness means, and how that affects everything, and how it affects your daily life, and how, for me, that's a daily thought. I know my brother Blair here, it's a daily thought. It comes, in every interaction. Now, I can't even imagine how it would be to grow up and that not be the first thought, how that can positively impact your whole life, because that's not what you're thinking about.
Right.
But I've come to embrace it, and it's getting better.
Yeah. I'm curious then, with that as kind of like the background and sometimes the noise, what does that mean for you in choosing a partner? Like, how did that impact, or how did that show up for you?
So yeah, for me, I always felt that I wanted to be with someone who was multiracial, just because they would understand, that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually, just growing up until now, I've, for the most part, had multiracial partners, because I just felt that was a thing that we could connect on that most people can't. So that's definitely affected who I sought out.
Yeah. And so, Shanna, is that how you identify?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So I'm biracial. And so, yeah, I have a similar experience to him growing up, not fitting in with either of my races. And so that's something that we have bonded over.
Sure. Is that something, can you share a little bit more about that? Would you be open?
Sure. So my mom's Vietnamese and my dad is white. And so my mom's family, we weren't very close to them. So I don't really know the Vietnamese culture. I didn't really grow up with the culture. I don't speak the language. And then I don't look like a white person. And so, yeah, I don't really identify with either of them. So growing up, I would just have a whole hodgepodge of friends, because I didn't fit into either one of those.
So in some ways, there's what you're sharing, what you're both sharing, is that there's a sense of safety in finding each other, and a sense that there's this shared experience of not necessarily being able to identify with one or the other, but having to interact with different groups in different ways, and having to almost navigate your identity while navigating how the world is perceiving you.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does that look like in terms of being perceived as a couple? What's that experience for the two of you when you're out in the world?
We were talking about this actually last night or the night before, and it's interesting for us, and I think that's where Blair and Sarah will have a lot more insight to share, because we're a fairly new couple and we haven't truly experienced the world out there together because of the pandemic.
We've been home a lot.
Yeah. I mean, almost every weekend we're home, or even when we're out, we're masked. And I feel like compared to before, where you would kind of make eye contact or notice strangers, I feel like with masks, we're just tunnel vision, gotta go do what we gotta do. There's still a pandemic, the overall awareness has changed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Blair and Sarah can probably share way more about that, because they've been together now 10 plus years. But I'll talk about race more later.
Okay. All right. So since you've been referred to a couple of times, what do you want to share in terms of, your experience of being together for such a long time, and in some ways the why you chose each other in the first place?
So I was born in Korea. I lived there for 6 years, but when I moved to California, I grew up in a predominantly Asian neighborhood. So I didn't have the kind of, trials and tribulations like Nikki and Shanna did. I only had Korean friends. I only dated Korean guys. 75% of my high school were actually Korean. And then there was only one Black guy in my entire high school. So I didn't have any visibility to really any other ethnicity and race. And then I finally got it in college. I went to school in Miami, and I finally had Black friends and, was around them more. And I was like, that was my preferred race of choice. I was attracted to them physically to start, but then when I moved back here, I met Blair through a mutual friend, and he kind of opened up my eyes to his, race and culture, because I don't have too many American friends. And to me, I did grow up with a stereotype because I was raised in a bubble. So to me, Black people represent like the music and, you know, movies and things like that. But when I met Blair, he comes from a very highly educated family. His parents are doctors. Blair went to an Ivy League school. You know, he was really successful and career driven. And I think that kind of opened my eyes to not being so narrow-minded. And I think that was really helpful in also getting me out of my shell, because I grew up where my parents' generation, the men are the primary breadwinners, the women are the homemakers. So my mom's never had a job in her life. Her job was to raise me and my sister. And when I dated Blair, I kind of had a learning curve with that, because my dad pays for everything. You know, my mom's never had to take her wallet out. But with Blair, I think he's helped me really to kind of grow into the independent woman I am today. We split some bills, but, you know, and I still like when he, you know, treats me out to dinner, but I think I also do enjoy it. He's made me kind of more career driven and more independent, which I appreciate. And I think I would not have gotten that if I continued to kind of just date the Korean guys that I grew up dating.
Sure. Blair, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, so to take it a step back, similar to my brother Michael, growing up, I did have identity issues of sorts. So I grew up in the suburbs of LA. I was pretty much the only Black male in my grade all the way through high school. And I think when I was young, I was kind of naive, and I thought to myself, like, I was fully comfortable with that. Like, all my friends were white for the most part, and they treated me fairly and everything. So in my mind, I'm like, you know what, I don't have like identity issues. But as I grew older, I realized I was uncomfortable with my Blackness being young, particularly because a lot of what's portrayed in the media is like, you know, Black people are uneducated or speak a certain way or dress a certain way. And throughout my life, I've had instances of people basically challenging my Blackness, like saying, "Oh, you're not really Black. You speak this way," or "You're not really Black. You don't like doing this," or "You like skateboarding," or this and that. And ironically, over time, like half of these things Black people love doing, so the media says. But for me, I think that's always been a challenge in terms of me choosing my partner, because for me, it was always a situation of me feeling like I needed to prove my worth. Like, oh, I'm an exception. Like, don't worry, I, you know, am educated or this and that. And I think when it came down to race, I didn't really like have a preference of sorts. I think it was more so a cultural thing that I could just sense, like, oh, they get it, they understand. I don't have to explain myself why I like this kind of music or this kind of scenery or hanging out with these kind of people. Like it was just that natural thing that clicked. And if that was the vibe and frequency that we were on, then it was cool with me. And that's something I find to be a challenge, just interacting with people in general, is that whole identity thing. Kind of feeling like I need to prove myself as the exception, even if, you know, say we're around maybe more traditional Korean people, maybe I have to like put on a bit of a show to be like, hey, here's my diploma, like something like that.
Right, that you're safe.
Right. So, I mean, that's been a challenge, but it's also been a challenge my whole life. So I don't feel like it's this daunting new discovery. It's kind of just like, at this point, part of the game for me.
Right. And I mean, your wife mentioned like this learning curve. What was it like for you to be on the other end of her learning curve towards you? And then the reverse, what was potentially your learning curve in terms of getting to know her and understand her?
Right. I mean, if anything, it was a learning curve for her still, because I think I love Korean food and culture more than her. So she has to convince me to like stray away from that stuff. So honestly, it wasn't that much of a learning curve. I've been fortunate enough to have friends from all different backgrounds. I love experiencing new things. So even like when I'm at the table with her parents and they're all speaking Korean and making fun of me, probably, I'm just sitting there enjoying the food. I feel like I've been able to adapt to those kinds of environments. So if anything, I considered it like I don't know, like a class of sorts or a learning experience that was worth it. It never felt like an extra task that I had to do.
Okay. And there is, I mean, in terms of what the two you're speaking, or what you were speaking of, this idea of having to prove yourself, but also I want to name that there was also a level of privilege that you could prove yourself, right? In terms of the background or the legacy that you're coming from. And like, I'm curious, like, is that something that you wrestle with in terms of obviously having the same experiences as other Black men in many ways, but also having experiences where you might be able to circumvent sometimes. And what is it like maybe to hold that, if you are holding that, right, that experience?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is something that I wrestle with. I mean, I have friends or people that I've encountered who aren't as privileged and are part of various minority groups, and have kind of been guilt tripped into feeling like I'm not deserving of some of the things I've worked towards. And I think that's where I kind of identify with the people who don't like that word privilege, because I know that none of this was just handed to me. But at the same time, I understand there were certain struggles I fortunately didn't have to deal with that may have made achieving those things that much harder. So on the flip side, I have friends or people I've encountered who are more privileged than me, who kind of discount the struggles and situations that people are in that they can't get out of. And I guess it's a blessing that I'm able to be part of those conversations, but at the same time frustrating, because there's like not one side to choose. It's like, this side hates me for this side hates me for that, and I'm just like, I don't know what to do at this point, but I'll try to like be as level-headed as possible.
Sure. So I want to open it up to anyone who wants to answer. What is it like to have to support, not have to, but like, what's it like to support each other, knowing these other things are happening, right? That we're having these experiences in the world that can be dangerous and difficult or just uncomfortable. And knowing that for everyone, each couple, I may not quite understand, I may not be having that same experience when I go in the world. What does that support look like, or what's the support that you may be craving?
I think for us, like, knowing, I know that if I encounter or experience something, that I feel like we've created the communication and like a safe space to be able to share those things and acknowledge maybe the feelings or emotions of what happened, but also I feel like we're comfortable enough with each other to also like push back if, oh, well, what if that person meant it this way? Or what if this happened? Blair and I, our younger brother, Corey, he and I have had some pretty deep and interesting conversations about race relations and just like, culture and perception, because, he's encountered some things and gone through some pretty serious stuff racially. And so, with him too, it's a matter of when Blair and I talk to him, or he leans into us, like creating safe space to hear him out, but also like pushing back if, there could be another angle to it, and it's being careful not to go too far down any place or rabbit hole when it comes to that, because, we want to also stay, like Blair said, like level-headed and but when there's, when something is totally a wrong or very clear, blatant, definitely want to feel safe with each other to share that stuff and then support each other to kind of get through it and past it.
Who else wants to share on that particular, or add on to that thought?
Yeah, I'd say similarly. I mean, during the pandemic with Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate, we were, of course, supportive of each other during those events uh, for obvious reasons. But I think in the back of my mind, at least I wanted to make sure we weren't feeding into the us versus them mentality and, pointing fingers at every corner that we could, just because I don't think that solves anything. Especially during the pandemic, I think it was easy to fall into that tribal mindset of, everybody's racist and evil and out to get you, which obviously isn't the case, even though those people do exist. So I think it was more so having a productive conversation about it rather than just waking up one morning and saying we hate XYZ group because of some video that went viral on Instagram.
Sure. And do you, again, for the four of you, within this relationship, are there still edges where you feel like your partner doesn't quite understand? And I'm talking specifically from a cultural or a racial standpoint.
I mean, one thing I always think about or feel, or even when it goes back to the whole inferiority thing, complex, and like having to get past that or move past that. And in a lot of situations like that, I'm sure Blair's very used to this. We compensate, we make ourselves extra extrovert. We go out of our way to make everyone else feel comfortable because of our darkness or blackness, or, and like, it's exhausting, but we're also kind of so used to it. But then I think a lot of the awareness and things that came about just in the last couple of years, I think has really made, I know people personally who view Blackness differently, after the last couple of years. And it's crazy that it took all of that for people to see it, and to see how different life can be and life experiences, or the most basic interactions, how every little thing, like how every little microaggression can just, add up and affect you. And it's one little thing that someone else says incorrectly, or you take offense to it, they don't even realize it. And so, that's been interesting or challenging. And when it comes to like partners, it's, I think that's a thing that I do think about, like the color of my skin, literally, and how that's perceived or viewed. I think I've always had that complex. And so, yeah, even with, let's say, Shanna and I, there's obviously visibly a color difference. And I think of that, not a lot, but I'm aware of it.
Sure. And
that,
go ahead. I was gonna ask.
Just that, I don't think we've had those conversations yet, but I'm sure as the world opens up post-pandemic and we go out there more, I'm sure those conversations will come up,
Sure. And what about for you, Shannon? Is there edges around your own cultural identity that you're still trying to translate to your partner?
For myself, no, I don't think so. Just because like I had mentioned, I don't really know the Vietnamese culture. And so I guess it's just like a mixed American person. Like he understands me in that way. But I definitely have learned a lot about his experience just going through everyday life. And it's been very interesting. And I think it's been really important for me to just be supportive and create that safe space for him.
Sure. And so what would safety and support look like for you? Or what does it look like for you?
For me, it looks like just listening to what he has gone through. And then just, I guess, being there for him. And,
the reverse, like how do you feel safe? How do you feel supported in this relationship? And it doesn't have to be cultural, because we're also talking about relationships.
I feel safe and supported because he shows up for me, and that's not something that I've been used to in relationships. So it's been really nice.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? What does showing up mean for you?
Sure. Showing up for me just in not just like bad times when I'm having a bad emotional day or when something happens, but even just in everyday life, like him just being there for me. Yeah, it's been really nice.
Good, thank you. And what about for you, Sarah? Is there one backing up a cultural edge that you're still trying to share or explain with your partner? And then I'll ask you about the support part too.
Not necessarily. I feel like that happened when we first started dating. I was scared to actually tell my parents about Blair, so it did take about a year and a half to almost 2 years for me to introduce him. And when that day came, I was ready to disown myself because I didn't know what my parents, how they were going to react. I knew on paper he was perfect, so if they didn't like him, it was purely because of his color of his skin, which I wouldn't accept as their firstborn daughter. And so I think that was the main thing. But they got to know Blair, and I think I opened up their eyes because they don't know any Black people. I think Blair and his family are the very first interactions they've had on a personal level. So on my end, culturally, that's kind of the main, issue that I had in the beginning that we've overcome many years ago. But I don't think there's anything in particular that I still feel like I need Blair's support or anything like that. We always joke that he's more Asian than me, we go get a bowl of pasta once in a while. So in terms of, I think that was a huge plus for me is when I take him to my parents' house for dinner, I don't have to worry about if he's not going to like something, because there are certain foods that have a weird smell or whatever, but I've never heard him once complain. And my mom's still to this day very impressed with everything that he eats. And I think that if he was anyone else that's new to the Korean culture, that would be like my biggest obstacle, but I was lucky enough to not have to deal with that.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, like how important is your culture in this relationship? Like you're sharing how it's showing up in terms of food, like how else might it be showing up in terms of how you organize your home or your life or your future plans?
I think it's more so, even though I identify like fully, I'm very patriotic to like Korean. I'm like, I never say I'm Korean American because I'm not, even though I lived in the US for a majority of my life. But in terms of like the Korean culture in me, I just would expect him to come to like, my family dinners and just like be present, show respect, if my parents come through the door, like stand up to greet them, like little things, because I think he gets away with it because he's American. It's, there's different dialects. You have to speak in honorifics if you're talking to someone older than you, but obviously he doesn't speak Korean. He's not Korean. So I think he gets a pass for all those things. But I think little things showing respect, bringing a gift to the house when he comes down or things like that, which he's definitely done, and he's won many brownie points for those actions, I think is super important for me, and that he continues to do that.
Yeah, great. And Blair, what about for you? Is there things about your identity or your culture that one obviously are showing up in the relationship, but something that you also want to like build a family around? Even if it's just the two of you.
I mean, from my standpoint in terms of culture, I've always struggled to really identify what mine is. I think the biggest thing that she already brought up earlier was the dynamic between the husband and wife. Like my parents pretty much were earning the same amount and divided up the duties for the most part. Of course, there are little nuances here and there, but I think just seeing that and being around that and living in a culture that's very kind of independent in America, naturally that was my inclination with our relationship, whereas her parents have a very different way of handling things. So I think that has been something we've been working on. But outside of that, I don't think I have any like rigid cultural things that like have to be instilled in our kids if we have anytime soon.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty open-minded in general.
And that's kind of crazy because like just hearing him say that out loud too is kind of crazy because he's my brother. We're half brothers. We have the same dad. But literally Sarah explaining all her cultural stuff, I actually connect with that more because my mom is Indian. And so like I grew up with her for the most part, whereas Blair grew up with my dad for the most part and his mom. So so I know a lot about the Indian Hindu culture. I speak Hindi. I cook a ton of Indian dishes. I can enjoy a Bollywood movie. You know, so like, and I want to carry that forward. And then, you know, our dad is Jamaican. And so like that culture is really vibrant and amazing and deep rooted. And he's like the ultimate Jamaican, our dad is. So it's like both, for me, both cultures are very important. And, you know, I'm excited to like, if we do start a family, like I'm excited to pass all of that down to my kid, you know, because I think those, yes, I'm American and I value and you know, appreciate like everything around that. Because for me, both my mom and dad were immigrants. And so I'm the first generation born here for both of them. And so, you know, just as much as I value and respect both of my cultural ethnic backgrounds, you know, I also like embrace and don't let anybody tell me that I'm any less American.
What I'm curious about the benefits, but I guess my first question is, like, what would you all want people to know or understand that maybe we don't, like standing from the outside, understand about being in a multicultural, multiracial relationship?
Something that just comes to mind off the top is like, you know, I think the difference between, let's say, two people of the same race, culture, versus us, let's say in our case, you know, meshing, and our dad's mixed a bit too. So it's like meshing 4 or 5 different cultures or backgrounds or ethnicities and trying to, you know, I think that'll be a challenge and something that we carry that that other couples, you know, who aren't interracial may not carry. So like those are additional conversations that we'll have around that. And especially if we start a family, like, you know, you have to have those conversations, you know, with this kid, and as they grow up, like explain things along the way. So I think that'll be interesting and fun and different and challenging.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I think for me, a lot of people have a tendency to assume that with interracial couples, there's some sort of like fetishizing thing going on, or it's like some weird opposites attract thing and people are doing it for the thrill or whatever. I think that's been sometimes on my mind. Like, oh, do people think I'm with her just because like I like anime or something? Which isn't the case, but
Because you like Asian food.
yeah, that's the real
And
reason.
I cook.
But yeah, I think a lot of people who are maybe more closed-minded feel like there has to be some weird ulterior motive, when at the end of the day, it's just another human being that doesn't necessarily share the same culture or look like me, and it can work perfectly fine as long as your values and interests are aligned. There's really like no difference to this, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I wanted to add, like, I don't think our relationship and marriage could have lasted this long if my initial attraction to Black men when I was in college, like if it was just that, right? It's like I got to know Blair as a human being outside of the color of his skin, and introduced me to a lot and showed, you know, his culture and vice versa. So I think while it may have started as just kind of an attraction with the color of his skin, I think, again, it would not have lasted this long if it was just that. There's something more deep that I was able to dive into. And I think I love him outside of that. So yeah.
Yeah. So one last question, so I know we're starting to wrap up. I'm, in terms of what I would consider like the benefits of this relationship, but I think there's a better way for me. I'm trying to find a better way to say that. But like, as you're saying, like we've grown to share values. We've grown to love each other deeper than obviously our initial attraction. I guess, can you, and even though I know you're a young couple, a new couple, what are the things that you're finding that are rooting your relationship? What are the values that you're finding that are keeping the two of you in both couples together?
I think that we have really common goals for the future, and we've made a priority to try and have a really healthy relationship, and communication has been a big priority. And so I think that has really connected us. And we've just really bonded over our shared experiences, being multicultural people.
Mm. You all can answer.
I think for me, it really has been us being aligned on our values and things we want out of life. Like there's not many things where we have much of a difference. And even if we do, it's not so significant that things wouldn't just work out. I think we've pretty much been on the same page with about everything since we first started dating, at least the major important decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the experience too with us, which is rewarding, is we both belong to minority groups, so we've faced our fair share of discrimination in different ways, and it's cool that we get to not only be empathetic to that, but also share new experiences and be a bit more objective about things. I think it forces me to kind of be less tribal with my thoughts when I have her and people of different backgrounds. I feel like if you're pigeonholed into hanging out with one group and dating one type of person, then there's a higher likelihood that you'll end up with a super narrow-minded outlook on the world.
Thank you. Well, thank you, all four of you, and both, when I say both couples, for again kind of sharing your insight, sharing your truth and your vulnerability. I know this isn't always easy to be public with what's going on in terms of our private lives. And then at the same time, I think what you both shared at the end, this idea of that it is our values, right? It is the way that we support, the way that we create safety, the way that we create and understand a future together, which is what brings us together. And in some ways, yes, opposites can attract, but that we can have shared values and shared ideas, even coming from very diverse cultural backgrounds. And I think the other part I wanted to add is that even when we're not in what may seem like a multicultural, multiracial relationship, it's still multicultural, right? That like me coming from a single family with four siblings might culturally be very different from someone who's coming from what might be considered an intact home if I'm growing up in LA versus growing up in Wisconsin. Like there's still so much culture and richness that I think sometimes we dismiss.
Right.
When we're coming together, when we potentially look alike, right? Mm-hmm. And so what you're all illuminating about the importance of sharing these foundations and ultimately doing these acts of kindness within our relationship from a place of love is what makes relationships work. So I just want to thank you, all four of you, for being here and sharing what you know and sharing your time and sharing your honesty. I'm incredibly appreciative of that. So thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank you all so much for coming out this evening for a truly amazing experience. station. So much things to soak in. I can't believe that we just witnessed that. Special shout out to our lovely moderator, Randé Dorn, and our amazing panelists. And they shared their social media pages, so make sure that you keep following them and see what they're up to. And if you love the conversation this evening, don't worry, because we're having more every other Tuesday. Our next one is March 29th, and it's about Filipinx representation in theater. Moderated by Lucy Burns, UCLA professor, John Lawrence Rivera, Bonnie B. Alvarez, and Allison De La Cruz, all panelists. It's going to be so amazing. We'd love for you all to join. And also, if you haven't already, come see Apartment Living at Skylight Theater from now until April 24th. Just go to our website, skylighttheater.org, and make a reservation. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for joining us again. Be well.